Greetings, one and all. Super Wednesdays here, the Holy Land, Holy Apple, Holy Hilltop. We are on the third day of the month of Shvat. Welcome to the new month, 5780. Subject today, continuing 2020, Anti-Semitism. Seeing the problem, seeing the solution, a must here. Okay, a 2-3 minute summary of last week's class. Last week we brought in statistics from the last 2 years up to date till the beginning of January of anti-Semitism all over the United States. Number 2, we brought a few clips of black reaction to Jewish attacks, some as the attacks were taking place, some afterwards. It was mighty frightening to listen to the reaction of some of the black community to the attacks on Jews. What was more disturbing than the reaction of some of the black community was the reaction or non-reaction of some so-called leaders and rabbis. We also saw some clips and some recordings of their message. Message basically is, we're not going anywhere. If we have any plans, it's to become stronger, to build up. We're not going out. Point number 4, we spoke about various points. There was an article, 50 reasons for Americans to be worried. We didn't give all the 50 because we didn't want to be here for a couple of days, but we gave about 12 of them why Jews should be mighty worried. When a Jew looks at the economical and the moral, spiritual backbone of America, it is mighty frightening. And if we might say today, even though this could be argued, but let's say pretty much try to get into the center, that today situation, financial, economical situation in America is not great, it's not terrible, it's somewhere in the middle over there. If all this is happening to the Jews when times are somewhere in the middle, what happens, looking into the points, some of the points we read about points that looking at American society, the culture, and some of the financial numbers, what happens as this gets worse. So that does not spell very promising for the Jewish community in America. Our next point was that throughout history, last 2,000 years, wherever the Jews were in their community, in their town, in their city, there was always one card that the anti-Jews, anti-Semites would pull against the Jewish people. Sometimes they complained that in order to find justification for attacking Jews, they used the Jews are poor and a burden on our society. Other places in the world, the anti-Semites, to justify their attacks on Jews, pulled out the well-to-do, rich card. But in every place it was one card. For the first time in history, in America, Europe, we have all the cards in one deck, in one place. Whatever card you want to pull out in order to attack the Jewish community, you have today. The Jews are poor, you got that. You could bring your statistics. Jews are rich, you could bring your statistics. Jews are behind the impeachment of President Trump. Jews are against President Trump, you got that club. Jews are for President Trump, you got those haters that hate Trump and hate the Jews. The Jews are segregated, that's our card. Or the Jews are mingling, they're getting into our insides, into our intestines, into our life, way of life. Jews run everything, Hollywood, government, and Jews do not participate. Jews keep segregated, keep to themselves. They are not really interested in America whatsoever. So whatever card you'd like to pull out, it's frightening, but you have all of your sources to pull out those cards against the Jewish community in order to justify attack, whether it's online attacks or real life attacks. And last but not least, we saw many names behind the Trump impeachment are, of course, Jews. So people will remember those names, Trump supporters, they will remember those. We spoke, last but not least, we spoke about CEOs using language as these are historical times that we are living in, what we are seeing, the attacks against the Jewish people. This is a new era. This is not our words. These are words of people that are behind the statistics. These are people that are behind, they are involved in anti-hate organizations. These are their words. We are witnessing, testifying to historical acts in the severity, in the type of acts on the Jewish community. This is a new era. Times are changing. Problem is, times are changing and these are historical events. But the Jewish people are still in a deep slumber. Okay. Now, our next topic, very, very important, is what I call the Goshen Syndrome. Not to get confused with Gotham City, like Batman and Robin. This is the Goshen Syndrome. What is the Goshen Syndrome? In 2 weeks ago, we started a new book, the book of Exodus. And one of the commentaries, his acronym is the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. He lived approximately 200 years ago. And he has many, many books. One of his books were commentary on the 5 books of Moses. And in the beginning, in the first verses of the book of Exodus, tells us an amazing line. Amazing concept and foundation. Listen to this. At the beginning of Exodus, we are told, the verse tells us in black and white, that the Jews filled Egypt. What does that mean, the Jews filled up Egypt? The Netziv explains, what does that mean? Any place that Jews found vacant to rent, to buy in Egypt, the Jews bought that up and settled there or rented there. So the Jews were populating Egypt. Now we know for many, many years the Egyptians respected the Jewish people and they liked the Jewish people. All of a sudden, based on a verse in the Torah, that respect and admiration that the Egyptians had for the Jewish people all of a sudden changed. And it turned into a tremendous hatred. Slavery, babies being thrown into the Nile and killed. What triggered the change of heart of the Egyptian population against the Jewish population? Listen to the words of the Netziv. The change of heart the Egyptians felt against the Jews was due to the fact that the Jews did not follow Jacob and Joseph's advice to remain separate and not leave the city of Goshen. When Jacob came down to Egypt, he came down as a stranger. He planned, his plan was to remain a stranger, not a resident, not a citizen, a stranger in a strange land, a temporary stranger until we are redeemed by God. Joseph, after 17 years when they lived together in Egypt, Joseph came with the same flag, the same banner. The Jewish people must stay separate in the city of Goshen. City of Goshen was only, where Jews settled, for Jews and where Jews settled. And Joseph, for 70 more years, continued the policy of his father to keep the Jews separate, out of the cities of Egypt, out of the intestines, out of the sight of the Egyptians. So the change of heart the Egyptians had was due to the fact that after Joseph passed away, the Jewish people began migrating and integrating into the various cities of Egypt. So the Netziv is telling us an unbelievable point. As long as the Jews were in the city of Goshen by themselves, segregated, there was no harm that was done to them. Not only harm, they were admired and respected by the Egyptian population. Everything, once the Jews moved in with the local natives, the Egyptians, it all turned around. It all turned into hate. And of course, once the Jews began to settle in Egypt, many of them also began to assimilate. They began to see the ways of the Egyptians, rap with them, speak with them, see what the Egyptians were up to, what the culture was about, and they too began to assimilate. The same fundamental is brought down by the Tiferet Yaakov. Tiferet Yaakov, on page 52, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Zisselman, in a book published 103 years ago. Listen to his words. The Egyptian people became frightened, claiming that shortly we will have nowhere to settle in Egypt, as the Jews have settled everywhere. Same idea here. The Egyptians were becoming frightened. They saw that the Jewish people were multiplying, and they were beginning to take up the houses and the homes all over Egypt. There was no place. They were afraid there was no place for them to live anymore, where they had grown up, where they were generations already, and the Jews were moving in. This caused the Egyptians to begin to hate and put the Jewish people into servitude and to kill off the Jewish people. In an article by a website called newsbusters.org. I read the headline, Ugly. NBC's New York City affiliate blames Jews for being attacked. Rise of anti-Semitism. Okay, so we found, NBC found a easy victim, a person that had tweeted in his account that the rise of anti-Semitism was due to the fact that for some reason, as we will see in a minute, the Jews are to blame. Why are the Jews to blame for anti-Semitism? Why aren't the the anti-Semites, they should be the ones to be blamed. Listen to this. Okay, so he's attacked. The headline here, ugly. Like this guy, what he's saying, oh, he's putting the blame on the Jews. Let's see what he said. Thursday morning, an authorless piece entitled Anti-Semitism Grows in Jewish Communities in New York City Suburbs was tweeted from NBC account. I'll read a few lines. With the expansion of Orthodox communities outside New York City has come civic sparring, and some fear the recent violence may be an outgrowth of that conflict. Yeah, the expansion of Orthodox communities. The expansion of Hasidic communities in New York's Hudson Valley, Catskills, and northern New Jersey has led to predictable sparring over new housing development and local political control. So we have two problems here. When the Jews are expanding and moving out of the cities, the Jewish neighborhoods, and expanding, there's some problems over here, because then there's only a certain limited amount of housing. Who is going to get the housing? The non-Jews that live there, or the Jews that are moving in? Also, who politically controls that community? When you politically control a place, we're talking about also there's financial issues here. How many communities are we talking about? 1, 2? No, not at all. Listen to this. What I've gathered up, we're talking about at least 8 or 9 communities. We have the Hudson Valley, Catskills, North Rockland County, Toms River, Jersey City, Jackson Township, Chester, Monroe. The report goes on. The slayings happened in a neighborhood. We're talking about the Jersey City grocery shop slaying. The slayings happened in a neighborhood where Hasidic families had recently been relocating amid pushback from some local officials who complained about representatives of the community going door to door offering to buy homes at Brooklyn prices. Some towns, some of these 8 or 9 communities, have enacted zoning changes forbidding new houses of worship. The communities that were there originally, the non-Jews that live there, they're becoming frightened with all this influx of religious Jews. Their communities are changing. Rockland County Executive Ed Day said the arguments over housing density involve legitimate policy issues and are the biggest challenge when it comes to accommodating the growing Orthodox Jewish community. The Orthodox community has special needs, he said, like housing for large families and residents within walking distance to a synagogue. That creates demands that are counter to many of the communities they are residing in, Day said. town supervisor Alex Jamieson of Chester, New York, announced, "Our idea is to keep the Hasidic out. The fear is Jews from KY, Kiryat Yoel, Monroe, will be moving in as there has been a rapid population growth. The town Chester just purchased a 1 million 9-acre plot in order to try to stop the expanding of the Jewish community." He's the bad guy. Whoever tweeted this, he's the bad guy. He's pointing the finger that the rise of anti-Semitism, some of it is due to the fact that Jews are moving out of their Jewish communities, cities, and they're coming into these suburban places. They're moving in to existing communities, which is causing a major friction. And he's the bad guy. But folks, is he the bad guy? Or did he hit the nail right on the head? Let's look at some comments. Comments on the YouTube. Comment number 1. The cancer Jews are invading Jackson. They're not too happy about Jews moving in. Number 2, the mayor is a hero. In many of these communities, they're trying to pass ordinances in order to stop the expansion of the Jewish communities. So that mayor who's trying to stop the expansion of the Jewish communities, he's a hero. Number 3, my aunt told me they came to Newark looking at other people's properties. They even went to some church asking them to sell. You see in this interview on YouTube, you see a guy named James Hayes. He sold his house to a Jewish family. James Hayes, shame on you for selling out. The next comment, in order to understand what he's saying, they interviewed one of the Jewish representatives in the city council, and he said to prove that the Jews are for all residents, he gave an example that there was a vote on a school in the area of Lakewood, a public school. Of course, no religious Jews are sending their kids to public school. So you see, we don't have any of our kids there, and we voted that the school should be able to make there was all kinds of problems with leaks, etc. In order to refurbish the school, we voted for this measure, even though we don't have children in your public school system. Listen to this. That guy is so full of blank. To say that they voted in favor of a referendum to fix the school, you have to fix the roof in a school. What are you going to do? Have rain go on kids' heads? He is simply trying to make it look like they care about the public school system. What he's not saying is that the public school system in Lakewood has fired over 30 school teachers in the public schools. And they've also eliminated some after-school programs because they have to pay for segregating buses to Jewish schools. So it's like, instead of us receiving the funding, a lot of the funding is going to the Jewish community because they have also representatives on the council. And we go further. The Orthodox are religious radicals, no better than the radical Islams. They bankrupt everywhere they go. They contribute nothing outside of their communities. They won't even say hi to you. Our state news, or fake news, doesn't tell the truth. about the Jews being attacked lately. Although I don't condone it, it's more understandable when you understand these people are bankrupting us. We go on. Fight them. Google Orthodox Jews and Ramapo, New York. See the damage the Jews are causing. It's irreversible. Next comment. Keep the Jews out. They're no good. Next comment. This video leaves out footage of Orthodox Jews routinely trespassing on people's property or even peeping in the windows in order to intimidate them to sell their homes. Next. Why do Jewish Orthodox folk insist on hurting us by overpopulating the region? There are too many people here asking for too few real estate offerings. It's hurting us. There's only a limited amount of space and apartments and homes available. Next, zero traffic enforcement by police against this cult. Police are sleeping there. Jews are coming to their neighborhoods and offering money and offering to buy them out, etc. Last, clearly the rabbi there in New Jersey are behaving very badly. The clash of civilizations. Folks, let's put the cards on the table here. I look at myself. I live in a small community. It's about 400 families called Elon Moreh, Shechem, Nablus. Everybody in the community is religious. Now, imagine one day we have secular Jews moving into the neighborhood. This creates a lot of friction because of the fact that the lifestyles are so different. All of a sudden, where I live for 30 years, Elon Moreh, people are driving up and down the streets on the Sabbath. How do I take that? Not too kindly. All of a sudden, in my community where I came to live, in a religious community, all of a sudden, if we were bombarded by secular communities, secular people, families that do not have respect for the religious people, they're walking around half naked on the streets, that bothers me, it bothers my family, it bothers the kids that I teach. Torah. What kind of place is this? A family decides to open up a restaurant on the Sabbath. Jewish holidays. That would bother me. It's frightening. You're in a certain community for so many years, and you're used to a certain way of life. And all of a sudden, a group of people come. It changes around the entire flavor, aroma of the community that you, maybe your parents, your grandparents have lived for so many years, more than me, more than 30 years that I've been in Elon Moreh. There's no way out here. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. On one hand, could understand the Jewish community. They're growing and they need to find places. They need to find new places. On the other hand, I can understand the non-Jewish population that have lived there for so many years. And the Jews come in and they change the entire scenery of your community. But it's more than that. It's not just that they change the scenery. That is difficult enough. But here we said, it also is political control. There's also a city council or a town council. There's also funding. It's not just the scenery has changed. That perhaps we could live with. But it goes a lot deeper than just scenery. So, how easy it is to get on this tweeter guy, oh, it's so ugly, blaming the Jews on the anti-Semitism because they're moving into suburban communities, which is causing all of this friction, a lot of this friction. He's not the bad guy. He's not the ugly guy. He's just pointing. He's showing us. Right, this is a problem. This is definitely, as the 20 comments that I read, this is definitely causing a clash of civilizations. And we happen to have a video on the clash of civilizations.
It's an ongoing, bitter turf war.
Just 50 miles north of New York City.
It's a village, little more than a square mile, that has rapidly grown in size to more than 20,000 people.
Curious Joel is a village within the town of Monroe. Members of the Satmar community from Brooklyn originally moved in over here.
The Hasidic life revolves around family and children.
Growing up, we always knew that the local people don't like us.
There's a high demand for housing in Curious Joel. A petition was submitted seeking annexation of 507 additional acres.
We need more room, but they're just not going to give us what we need.
This annexation must be stopped.
We need to protect the schools, not only for the kids, but for our home values.
Outside people, they don't understand anything about our life. We live the world of today. We live it in a secluded way, without people that we're afraid of.
There has been violence in Curious Joel against those who step out of line.
I can have empathy for your way of life. What about mine?
I had no idea what a political powerhouse that the Hasidic community is.
The tensions that are caused by all these events translate into explicit anti-Semitism.
Monroe is a beautiful place to live. It's also where the clash of civilizations is taking place more here than anywhere else in America.
There are two concepts that I will bring now that seem to be a contradiction of terms. First term, it says in the Torah, most people know this statement, but they don't know where it's from. Most people think that it was from Rashi, but Rashi brought it from somewhere. Rashi brings it from the Sifri in Numbers, paragraph 69. There is a law in the world, a nature in the world, that Esav hates Jacob. It's a law of nature. It's a halacha, it's a Jewish law. Now that seems like anti-Semitism is not in our control whatsoever. Whatever we might do as a Jewish people, there's a nature, there is a law that the nations hate the Jewish people. Doesn't matter if we're good, bad, in the middle. This is also, this idea is brought down by many. We'll just hit on two. The famous rabbi of the Mir Yeshiva, Rabbi Yerucham Leibowitz, in his book, Da Torah, on Book of Genesis, page 227, writes the following. It says in the portion of Vayishlach, it says that when Rebekah was pregnant with Jacob and Esav, the boys were stirring up in Rebekah's stomach. They were like kicking and fighting. Our sages tell us, what was the fight about? Listen closely what the fight was about. They are not born yet. They are in the womb of their mothers. But there still is a world war, so to speak, that is occurring between these two representatives, the Jews, the Jewish people, Yaakov, and the nations of the world, Esav. What are they fighting? What are they making a ruckus about? So our sages tell us two worlds. This world and the next. Amazing thing. The battle royal between the Jewish people and the nations of the world is a twofold battle. Two-sided. It's also a spiritual, to eradicate the spirituality of the Jewish people, and it also is a physical annihilation of the Jewish people. That is what the fight was about. And this is before they are even born. This was the intention of Esav with Jacob trying to protect himself. Rabbi Yerucham Leibovich says the following, I summarize. Since the beginning of time, the nations of the world have been at war against the Jewish people. 2. The same idiotic claims against Jews are recycled in every generation. Jews are rich, the Jews are poor, the Jews are clean, the Jews are dirty, the Jews are Democrats, the Jews are Republicans. It always, they're regurgitated as the generations pass. Even if there was one Jew in the world, there would be a war against that individual. Amazing. There is no concrete and logical reason for this hate and war. Rather, it's a part of the nature. Okay? Rabbi Yerucham says it very clearly. There's no concrete or logical reasons for this hate and war. It's part of the nature. Esav hates Jacob. The Jew is attacked, the rabbi says, if he lives separately, and he's attacked if he lives amongst the nations. He's attacked if he's rich, and he's attacked if he's poor. This is a war without reason till the end of times. It's like fire and water. Fire and water. Got a fire? How do you put it out? Got to have water. The goal of this war, the rabbi summarizes, is to annihilate the Jewish people physically and spiritually. It seems like from the words of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, our first source that brings down, it is law, it is nature that Esav hates Jacob, and the words of Rabbi Leibovich, it seems very clear that anti-Semitism is not in our hands. Seems like sort of very different from what we saw, the comments and the video that we saw with the Jews moving into KJ, Kiryat Yoel in New York, and other 8 or 9 communities. The Netziv summarizes in a commentary on the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. He writes at the beginning of the commentary, I summarize, when there are tranquil periods in in the history of the Jews. Quiet, tranquil. Jews begin to believe that the nations really love us and are interested to have us in our midst. Listen to these words closely. Rewind that one. This is an illusion, the Netziv says, lived 200 years ago. In every generation, by the way, Rabbi Yerucham Leibovich passed away about 85 years ago, the first commentary that we read. This is an illusion. In every generation they are prepared to annihilate us. However, Hashem, God, saves us. 3. It is fundamental to realize this love of theirs, even though it may stretch for a certain period of time, will not hold up forever. 4. Even during good times, the nation's hatred is alive but concealed, ready to explode at any given time if God sees fit. Even in the good times, we need not investigate the reasons for their hatred, as this is a hatred for eternity. The Netziv, like Rabbi Yerucham, like our sages in the Torah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, tell us no investigation, no political scientist is needed here to investigate the rise of anti-Semitism. This is a law. This is nature of the world, that the nations of the world hate the Jewish people. And even though it might seem for a certain period of time of years, decades even, that they admire us and respect us and love us, this is an illusion. It is concealed until God sees that the time has come for it to be revealed. The other side of the spectrum. Contradiction? Gotta have the other side here. Other side. Put on those seat belts. We see in many, many commentaries, in many books, we see, which seems like a contradiction, that the Jewish people are responsible for bringing upon themselves anti-Semitism. Let's look at these sources. Source number 1. We are told in the Talmud, Tractate Fasting, Ta'anit, page 10, side B. Listen closely. A person, a citizen, is leaving his community. He's leaving his community. It's a community that the Jewish people there are not fasting that day. Besides for the obligatory fast during the year, there's also private fasts or community fasts. Different events happen in a community. People begin to pray, people begin to fast in order to try to improve the situation. So, if I leave my community, and in my community there is no fast, there is no private fast day, and I go to a community, a Jewish community, where the people in that community are fasting, one must fast. Why? In order not to stick out. He has to blend in with that Jewish community. Let's say a person on a fast day. Second case, a person on a fast day forgot that it was a fast and ate. So now he's not fasting anymore, so maybe he just should keep on eating. He says, no, do not, it's true that you broke the fast, but do not show yourself, do not appear in public eating, because the community is fasting. Okay, you forgot and you ate, and you're not fasting today because you broke your fast. But do not come into people's faces while you're eating. Where do we learn this? We learn this from Jacob. It says in Genesis 40, it says that Jacob sends when there was a famine in the land, when the beginning of the famine began. Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt in Egypt there was food. In order to bring food from Egypt, he sends his sons down. Sounds like logical, no? There's only one problem here. That Jacob and his family had plenty of food. At this stage, they had plenty of food. So why is he sending his children down to bring back food from Egypt, bring it back to the land of Israel? So Jacob says in this verse, in chapter 40, he says, why should you show yourselves in public? What does that mean? Why should you show yourselves? So the Talmud goes on. Jacob told his sons, why should you appear? Why should you appear to the nations of the world as being satiated? You have no worries. You have plenty of food. And they're going to be looking at you and staring at you. And they're going to be jealous. How come these Jews, Jacob and his children, they have food? And look at us. Look at our predicament. That will cause jealousy and hatred. So Jacob says, we have enough food. We don't need it. But you go down to Egypt in order that you do not create a situation where you will bring upon the jealousy and wrath of the nations upon us. So keep a low profile. This seems contradiction to what we said, that we have no say. It doesn't matter what we do or don't do. There's going to be that hatred against the Jewish people, even if it's concealed, even if it's only for a certain amount of time. Doesn't matter what we do, good or bad. And here we see no. It matters what we do. If the Jewish people, if the Gentiles will see that the Jewish people during a famine, they have plenty of food, this is going to cause a tremendous backlash of anti-Semitism against the Jewish community. So don't do it. Number one. Number two. The Tiferet Yaakov. Printed in 1917, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Zisselman says the following. The Egyptians began complaining about the Jewish wealth and success, talking about when the Jews became slaves in Egypt. The Egyptians contested that the Jews had amassed the wealth through manipulating the Egyptians. We see here an amazing thing. Jewish wealth, money, success created anti-Semitism in Egypt. The Egyptians said that the reason why the Jews are wealthy and successful because it's on our backs. Jack, we're being manipulated by them. If you remember some of those videos we saw with the black community saying they own the buildings, they own the businesses, and they're not willing to bring us in. They're not willing to be fair. They give Jews a different salary, 3 times more than they give to us next. The book Givat Shaul. The Givat Shaul was written by Rabbi Shaul Mortira. He lived approximately 400 years ago. Listen to the words. I summarize. 400 years ago, the author of Givat Shaul got up. Rabbi Mortira gets up, and he says, you know what? He tells his community, we are continuing the mistakes, the sins that we did in Egypt. We're continuing down the same path. This is 400 years ago. Listen to what he says. Number one, as long as the Jews viewed themselves as strangers and guests, the nations did not harm them. Two, the next generation forgot this principle when they became wealthy and successful and began dressing fancier than the upper echelon of society. They desired to be ministers in the government or important dignitaries. Three, women began adorning themselves with the finest jewelry and wardrobe. Four, the Jews began building fancy homes and becoming obsessed with gourmet foods. Italian, Chinese, Japanese restaurants. They chose to ride in the fanciest of chariots. Today you could substitute that for cars. This all led to our demise and expulsion amongst the nations. Amazing. So, Rabbi Mortira, 400 years ago, he's saying, what we did in Egypt, the mistakes that we made, when we got into the faces, when we started moving in to the Egyptians, and we forgot that we were strangers, and we were only temporary guests over there. We forgot as the generations passed, and we became wealthy and successful, etc. The beat goes on. It's the same story everywhere in the world for the last 2,000 years. But the Jews sticking it, so to speak, in the face of the Gentiles with their wealth and their desire to be in the government and on the city councils and the municipalities. All of this has led to our demise and expulsion amongst the nations. The Orach Yesharim on page, by the way, that was page 91 in Givat Shaul. The Orach Yesharim. The Orach Yesharim, his book was printed 110 years ago. Rabbi Taxon, Menachem Tzvi Taxon, he writes on page 179, amazing things. What has caused the expulsion of the Jewish people throughout the generations? Listen to this. Fancy wardrobe, clothes. Fancy homes. Wealth. All of this has caused the Jewish people to be expelled from countries such as Spain, writes the author of the book, Orach Yesharim, Rabbi Taxon. Next, in the book Shtilei Zeitim, lived approximately 450 years ago, Rabbi David Mesharki. He brings down a work by the Maharitz. Listen to what Maharitz writes. He writes the following: in the laws of the intermediate days of Jewish holidays, he is pleading with the Jewish people. Do not, on holidays, there is a commandment for a person to dress as if he would be going to an important person. So therefore, a Jew dresses up on a Sabbath or holidays. So he pleads with the Jewish community. 450 years ago, this is even before that, this is a quote. So we're talking 500-600 years ago. He's telling them, please, as much as possible, stay in your homes. Don't be seen. Because when the nations of the world see your fancy clothing, wardrobe, hairstyles, wigs, this causes a lot of jealousy amongst the nation, on the part of the nations. And everybody, please, only if you must leave your house, then leave your house. And please do not go outside with fancy clothes. Because if you go out, if you leave your homes, and the nations of the world, the communities around us, will see the Jewish people in these fancy clothes, this brings upon us attack and jealousy. Last but not least, what causes anti-Semitism? The Netziv, once again, in his commentary on Shir HaShirim, it's called Rina of Torah, on page 282. He says, it's very interesting, the same Netziv who told us you don't have to look for reasons. You don't have to look for reasons why they hate us, because it's a natural phenomena in the world. It's part of nature. Still, even so, he tells us the following. You know what the main reason for anti-Semitism is? Number one, jealousy of Jewish wealth. Sticking it in the face of others. I'll never forget it. After the Jersey City grocery attack, there was a comment. I looked all over for it. I wasn't able to find it because it was some weeks later. But there's an amazing woman that wrote in. And it hurts to say, but what she wrote was that why do we have to stick in the face, so to speak, all types of wealth that she brought down? Our furniture, our dress, our jewelry, and she had a whole list of, instead of keeping it in your home to yourselves, it's open. The curtains, your home, it's open for everybody to see. And she pleaded. Amazing, exactly what he's saying here. Jealousy of Jewish wealth. A suspicion by the nations that the Jewish people are corrupt. Corrupt? The Gentiles will not forget certain names. The Jeff Epsteins, the Madoffs, the Weinsteins in Hollywood. Or, unfortunately, religious Jews taking advantage of welfare funding, as we will now see.
Federal officials say more than a dozen people, mostly from one family, are accused of scamming millions of dollars in a mortgage deal. Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Rose.
And I'm Scott McGee. That scheme stretched from Brooklyn to communities right here in the Hudson Valley, and News 12's John Goff has more.
The scope of the scheme described is breathtaking in its brazenness.
The 21-count federal indictment charges 15 people with mortgage and welfare fraud, along with other crimes. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara says the conspirators took in $20 million to pay credit card debts and their own home mortgages. During a news conference at the federal courthouse in White Plains, Bharara outlined how they, at times, claimed to be rich to get favorable mortgages, while at the same time claiming to be poor to get public assistance and to default on those mortgages.
The individuals charged today alternately played the part of prince or pauper, depending on which scam was being perpetrated.
According to Bharara, the fraud included properties in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and in Monroe in Orange County. It was uncovered by the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Most of those arrested are relatives and in-laws of Irving Rubin, including his wife and sons. 13 of those charged were arrested Thursday morning. 2 others voluntarily returned to New York from Florida. While the scheme outlined in this indictment is complex, Orange County Sheriff Carl Dubois says it all began with a bad check investigation by one of his deputies.
Her supervisor said, we have more than we can handle, obviously, and we went to the resources of the FBI, and it took off from there.
Bharara says investigators still aren't sure they've been able to fully unravel the complex conspiracy, and he says the investigation is continuing. In White Plains, John Goff, News 12.
Folks, this is not a contradiction. On one hand, it seems like there's nothing we could do about whether we're the greatest people in the world, the most honorable and honest people. Anti-Semitism is going to come upon us. On the other hand, it seems like there's a lot of things that we're doing that are in the face of the nations which are causing anti-Semitism. Which one is it? Are we responsible? Are we not responsible? The answer is, which is brought down in many books, is a simple answer. There is a nature in the world that the nation, there is a law of the land that the nations of the world hate the Jewish people. They're jealous. We're the chosen people. There's a lot of reasons for it. But it's a natural thing. It's a natural phenomenon. On the other hand, if the Jewish people are worthy, that hatred will continue to be concealed and not out in public, and will not express itself with attacks. If the Jewish people, on the other hand, if we are not going on a path of the righteous, if we've lost our way in life, then that anti-Semitism, which is concealed, explodes in our face. So there is no contradiction. There is a natural law that the nations of the world hate the Jewish people. However, that can remain concealed and contained and calm, cool, collective, as long as the Jewish people are doing what we are supposed to be doing. Once we stop, once we're OTD, off the derech, once our values system has gone way off, this definitely brings out that anti-Semitism. And we'll see, God willing, next week, there's another important ingredient here. The ingredient of not only our actions will decide where anti-Semitism will be on the rise, on the decline, but also one very important ingredient that also is not forgetting the land of Israel. If we begin to forget the land of Israel, if we refuse to come up to the land of Israel, the greatest place in the world, the holiest, the greatest spirituality here, where the divine presence is. If we refuse, if we forget, as we will go on next week, that brings the concealed and hidden anti-Semitism, brings it out as we